You're listening to 99.5 FM, WBAI, New York.
Not commercial, listener sponsored.
Peace and Justice Radio.
Now stay tuned for equal time for Freethought.
Back to Equal Time for Free Thought, where we explore a non-religious worldview based on scientific naturalism and secular humanism, and how this worldview can help us become a more equitable, socially just, and peaceful society. I'm Arnell Joy. To those out there who were sufficiently out of touch to have considered the election of our first black president an indication that our country had moved, finally, beyond its racist ways, recent events should serve as a loud wake-up call. Running not so far below the surface of the anti-healthcare reform teabaggers' rhetoric is virulent racial hatred, and the unprecedented level of disrespect directed at our first black president, such as South Carolina Congressman Joe Wilson calling the president a liar during his healthcare speech, or parents expressing their distrust of the president's plan to speak to our nation's school children by video, seems difficult to imagine were the president white. For me, these disturbing events became all the more frustrating when I caught an interview on Book TV with Sana Butler, author of the book Sugar of the Crop, My Journey to Find the Children of Slaves, published earlier this year. In her interview, Butler said that meetings she had with some of the few surviving children of black Americans who had been born before 1865 caused her to realize that there was no such thing as post-traumatic slave syndrome, and that the children of freedmen simply decided to choose not to let their experience influence the way they raised their own children. She claimed that the children of freedmen simply decided to leave their slave experience behind, and that currently any problems experienced by black American families who descend from African slaves is just the result of people deciding to not choose correctly. These ideas seem as if they're just another example of the fanciful belief in mythical free will, and in this case coupled with post-traumatic slave syndrome denial. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, as many of our WBAI listeners already know, is the work of Dr. Joy Degruy, formerly Dr. Joy Leary. Dr. Degruy has appeared on numerous programs on this station and has been previously a guest on Equal Time for Free Thought. Post-traumatic slave syndrome identifies certain problems which can be experienced by families who descend from African slaves. The syndrome it describes is the result of adaptive behaviors which originated during slavery and continued as the descendants of slaves were subject to ongoing discriminatory practices such as neo-slavery, sharecropping, peonage, Jim Crow, segregation, voter disenfranchisement, redlining, and the like. Dr. Degruy's work is the result of her years of experience working with African American families as a social worker and her training as a doctor of social work research. We'll play our interview with Dr. Degruy in a moment, but first, to familiarize you with some of Butler's comments, we have some sound clips from her recent broadcast interview, which was taped earlier this year.
We talk about how slavery is the root cause of the breakdown in the black families, right? So I looked for it. I expected it, I asked questions based on that. And every interview led me into a completely different direction. We focused so much on the, like I said, the horrors that they experienced, justifiably, right? Because that too needs to be recorded. But we have never focused the idea of how strong, how the souls were stronger than we expected. Imagine, like, the souls of slaves were stronger. Their strength was stronger than we give them credit for. We haven't documented that. And because we haven't documented that, what you have in its place is theories of post-traumatic slave syndrome, that slaves are traumatized by their experience, which led to where we are today,
Exactly.
right? I mean, interesting enough, one interview in Kentucky was a woman who talked about how her father chose not to beat her and her siblings because he was beaten as a child. Yeah.
Now, how does this change the paradigm of so much of what we've learned, about African American people socially? No excuses?
I think that somewhere along the line, we lost the idea of self-sacrifice as parents. When the freed slaves had their children, they put their children first. They didn't have to have a workshop, didn't have to be taught it, they didn't have to attend any classes, even though they had been auctioned away from their mother and father, separated from their family, traumatized
physically, sexually.
With their experience. They did not have to be taught how to raise a good family. What I discovered was that there was a fork in the road. After the Civil War, freed slaves had a choice. And their choice was to choose their experience and the painful, traumatic background as a slave from what they went through, or they could choose love. And the people I found chose love. They chose to make sure that they could raise good family. There's a choice. Either you can give your experiences of slavery to your children, or you can choose the direct opposite and raise them with love. And the first generation of free blacks, the sweetest out of the whole family, because they chose love. And it's just so beautiful thing.
After listening to Butler's ideas and criticisms, Dr. Degruy gave us this interview. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, the sound of Dr. Degruy's voice is not as clear as we would have liked, particularly in the first section. But we hope you'll hang in because, as usual, Dr. Degruy had some great things to say.
Hello, Dr. Joy Degruy, and welcome back to Equal Time for Free Thought.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be there.
Dr. Degruy, as you heard, Miss Butler seems to suggest that the people she spoke with showed absolutely no signs of having been traumatized, even though they were parented by people who had themselves been slaves. What do you think?
I would venture to say that if you press those folks further, you would find perhaps not those, but other behaviors that they never thought about. They never questioned that may, in fact, have been something they perceived to be innocuous, but was, in fact, some adaptive behavior that was positive. And it's not to suggest that we search for what is ugly and negative in everything that we see. I think very clearly what my work says is to tease out the poison from the cookies, to make certain that we do build upon the strengths, but at the same time begin to reassess the other behaviors, habits, and cultural norms, if you will, so that we can move on from them.
Butler seems to be saying that the children of freedmen she interviewed led her to conclude that rather than being traumatized, the experience of slavery resulted in cultivating many strengths, such as resilience and determination to raise healthy families.
To say that, yes, there were indeed folks that built upon that resilience and did not pass along the pathology, of course there were. Come on. I mean, we are as unique as any other group of people. And if you look at any group of folk out there that have been traumatized for whatever reasons, there are those that are more resilient than others, those that fall victim and succumb to some of those pressures and those activities, and others that rise above them and, in fact, excel. That happened. So I'm not trying to debate that even whoever these people were, that they were not speaking about a legitimate reality, but to draw a conclusion about everyone, now that you can't do. You just simply can't. And again, we do have slave narratives and recordings that really speak very clearly about that pathology. For example, Adelaide Sanford, who was one of the elders that I had spoken to. Now, Adelaide is up in age, but remember speaking with her grandmother, who spoke to her specifically about some of the things that they learned to do that allowed them to survive being in that environment. Some of those things were part and parcel with much of the material that I uncovered, which is the reason why Adelaide reached out to me, because she said, oh, my goodness, I heard what you were saying, and it was what my grandmother told me.
At the heart of Butler's analysis seems to be the belief that the former slaves made a conscious decision to let the past go and move on by simply choosing that in their families they would not perpetuate the violence they'd experienced as slaves. she seems to suggest that it's all just a matter of choice.
Right. Those are some of the statements that I would very, very strongly depart with. And to some degree, it's a bit offensive to me. Part of it is because for us, for me to sit where I am and look back and go, well, they could have just wrapped their head around this a little differently and made a decision to just move on, not considering what they'd experienced, not considering what each individual case, which obviously was unique and differed from the next, to suggest, well, slavery was over now. It is an intellectual reality that they just need to sit down, think really hard about it, and make a determination, just very absent of any sense of what the impact that had on them physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, however you want to look at it. It's like, no, you need to just separate yourself from all of that because all that's over now, and you have this great, wonderful opportunity ahead of you. My goodness, if you just follow the history after enslavement, it even became worse in some cases. So to suggest that people simply needed to make a decision about which fork in the road they're going to go, I find that very, very hard to swallow. In addition to that, clearly, at any juncture in our lives as human beings, we make choices. We make decisions. And we make those decisions based on what we have, whatever information we have in front of us, whatever experience, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, health that we have in front of us. So it's not a judgment. It's also saying that those people just chose to be sick. They just chose to be injured and to be affected. Oh, my God, as a clinician, having dealt with people, contemporary folks that have suffered tremendous trauma and assaults and all sort of things, I am amazed and give a great deal of room to folks to figure out how they're going to navigate from there. Because those injuries are clear and they're present, and with all of their will and their strength, it is still a very difficult task. And I have helped people through that process, but still, it is something that is not simply a choice. It is someone trying to now survive without a particular emotional limb.
The word choice itself is actually pretty complicated. And as you say, people make choices, but there are reasons why they choose as they do. And why people choose as they do can't be divorced from their history.
Exactly. The other thing that I think I had difficulty with is it's an either or. Either this or either that. And that also really trivializes the real breadth of experience and the breadth of knowledge that is within African and African-American culture to suggest you're going to either go this way or that way. That is a way of really kind of trivializing an entire group of people and suggesting that at one point we decided A or B. And it doesn't seem really plausible. And I think it kind of almost blames people. I blame your ancestors that didn't make that choice to not let it affect them.
It's the old game of blaming the victims for being victims. It's very convenient. It might lessen some people's guilt or discomfort about the suffering of others, but it's not reality.
And we also have to assume, too, that there were things that people just didn't know. They functioned based on what they understood. A lot of people were simply not educated and didn't know. So it was not a matter of choosing to be a victim. It's about trying to understand the world in which you are functioning in and trying to make sense of what you've experienced and what you see. And sometimes people were operating out of wrong information that has continually and perpetually been passed along. It wasn't a matter of someone choosing to be a victim. So it's like, again, that kind of plastering of black and white, and gets these folks who did okay. This particular family is due to the fact that, I don't know, their family just happened to be better, smarter, Right. It's pretty amazing. And I think that all of us are a mix of experiences and understandings, all of us. And to take and put people in one box and say they just chose to be dysfunctional and to blame it on somebody, that's not really what I hear. When I look at some of the narratives and when I hear from people, it's what they understand of their environment. It's not this intellectual conversation that I'm going to blame slavery